Welcome to the On the Rise podcast, where we talk about time freedom, passive investing through real estate, finance, and mindset. Let's dive in. Quick disclaimer as always, I am not a CPA, I am not an attorney or a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. I am not telling you or anyone else what to do. The views and opinions expressed in these podcasts are provided for education and informational purposes only and are not necessarily the views of my employer. All right, welcome back to the On the Rise podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Dyer. Thanks so much again for joining us. Really appreciate all those folks that have told me they've been binge listening to our episodes. I had one podcast listener a couple of weeks ago tell me, Jeremy, I binge listened to the last 100 episodes, which I think to myself, if each episode's 20, 25 minutes, that's a pretty good run. But that being said, I've got another amazing guest with me today. I've got Will Davis. Will, welcome to the On the Rise podcast.
Jeremy, thank you. Absolutely thrilled to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to chopping it up with you as well. Just a quick bio on Will. So Will teaches families how to achieve financial independence today by breaking free from 90s financial advice. Well, when I read your bio, I thought to myself, that's interesting because there's a lot of lessons that I personally have learned, as a direct investor. I was a byproduct largely of the 1980s. And so I'm fully in tune with kind of the 90s financial advice, but would love for you to kind of break down for our listeners a little bit more about, yourself, your journey, what you're focused on today, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, I'm a pastor's kid. I was, my family's from Austin, Texas. That's where I grew up. And I grew up in ministry and business and, financial and real estate. None of that was part of the plan. I'm Will Davis III. My dad's Will Davis Jr. There was a Will Davis Sr. And growing up in the church, people rub your head and say, you're going to be a pastor just like your daddy. You're going to be a preacher of a big church someday. And so that was just ingrained in me from a young age. And I just thought, oh, that's what I'll do. And so I did a lot of ministry in all kinds of different capacities, through nonprofit, worship leader, whatever the case may be. And at some point, people were kind of saying like, you should do business. It seems like you'd be good at business. And I was just so insulted by that because I was like, I'm in ministry. I'm a pastor. What are you talking about? And through some, life has a way of humbling you. And so about 2016, I got into real estate, got my license with absolutely no intention of doing that whatsoever. No intention of being in real estate and was just going to do it temporarily, but stayed in it and have been in it for the past 10 years. Really enjoyed it and helped people. I've been helping people and families buy and sell homes for the past 10 years in Denver. And Denver was one of the markets that just absolutely very robust when I at in, and then, just off the charts during COVID and has remained very stable since COVID. So, but, at some point, as I was helping these families kind of buy and sell these houses, they would come to me and they were all very, very financially responsible. So they were doing what they were supposed to do. They were following 90s financial advice, what I call 90s financial advice. So they were very low debt or no debt, both, generally dual income, good employment. They were maxing out their retirement accounts, attacking debt. And these people that were acing 90s financial advice were barely able to get a house, barely. And in some cases, were not. And I just kind of started realizing this whole thing is, I don't know, something's off here. And we were doing well. We were very blessed financially. And so I was maxing out on 90s financial advice, so everything, an S&P 500, buy and hold long-term, Roth IRA, backdoor Roth IRA, like everything. And I just kept looking at it going, is this, really it? And I also kind of I was becoming more aware that really the wealthier folks weren't doing 90s financial advice at all, like none of it. And so I started studying. And so you asked how I would define it. 90s financial advice is really just this, it's this idea. It's really just the conglomerate of all the financial education you've ever received from church or your aunt and uncle or from your parents or, prolific voices that talk about financial education. And it's kind of summed up in get a good steady job and steady paycheck, pay off debt as quickly as possible, max out your retirement. And there's more to it than that. But I just had this sense that like this is not working today, and it's not going to work for families in the future. And so I started working on what could we do instead.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I appreciate that kind of background makes total sense. And, I'd really, I guess this is kind of more like the elephant in the room question. And that is, back in the 90s, that type of financial advice that, your uncle or your friend Brad, or somebody that maybe was in a mentorship or, counseling capacity, for you, or a financial advisor, perhaps, why is it that that traditional advice that people were given in the 1990s, why does that not work today in 2026?
I think that's the most important question, right? It's like, okay, because everybody understands that at some point my parents were able to go buy a house, a great house comfortably, two cars, pay for college, pay for retirement, and just be, single income. So why did it work then, and why is it obviously not working today, right? Everybody kind of thinks, man, if I could, when you were a kid, you're like, oh my gosh, $100,000, that's insane. And then today, a lot of people are making that or more and struggling. And so why does it not work anymore? And that was one of the things I looked at first and studied the hardest. And the simple, there's a lot to it, but the really simple one word answer is inflation. And the 90s was, it was 30 years ago, but it was a lot. And in some ways, it was a lot more than 30 years ago. A lot's happened, a lot's changed. So just to give people an idea, like we're talking Bill Clinton, George Bush Sr., right? Desert Storm, the Cowboys won 3 Super Bowls. Like that alone, like feels like an eternity ago. And actually, at the end of the 90s, Bill Clinton got up there and presented that they'd had a budget surplus and this was going to continue and we were going to pay off all the national debt in 10 years. And obviously that didn't happen. And so what's different is the level of inflation that we have today and have had since then versus in the 90s. And so that just really, really, really defines everything. And without going too deep into it, the first piece that people can understand is that the vast majority of people then and today are on a W-2. They're getting a salary, and a salary is a fixed income. And salaries don't, even with cost of living adjustments, typically don't do well with inflation. And so you have, just to give you an idea, for the last 2020 to 2022, they printed $5 trillion in 3 years. So first of all, 1776 to 1980, it took us that long to get 1 trillion, and then we did 5 trillion in 3 years. So the net effect is if you had a $100,000 salary in 2020, you basically took a 20% pay cut over the 4 years of COVID. So you went from 100 to 80 because the dollar's been devalued and debased. And so you're on this fixed income. You don't have the ability to go recapture what you lost. And then a lot of the people I serve, which are families, their expenses are naturally growing, not growing like 90s financial advice says, where they went and bought a boat on a credit card. They're naturally growing because they have more mouths to feed. It's more food at the grocery store, more square footage of house, more cars. And so that is fundamentally what's different between now and the 90s.
I'm Zach Captainstall, CEO and co-founder of Rise 48 Equity. Our goal is to help you protect and grow your wealth by investing in large multifamily apartment buildings. We do all the work as far as sourcing these large apartment buildings from the brokers, doing all of the on-site management with our vertically integrated property management company, doing all the renovations with our vertically integrated construction company. We completely rebrand the exteriors. We will renovate the interiors to our full platinum level scope, which increases the value of the asset to get that profit margin for the investor. If you'd like to learn about how you can partner with us on these exciting opportunities, and go to our website and set up a call with our team.
I used the McDonald's case study with my children to kind of explain, inflation and the impact that it's had over my lifetime. And I'll regularly challenge my kids and I'll say, hey, how much does it cost to purchase a McDonald's value meal today? And of course, I'm not endorsing McDonald's here. And so my family really doesn't eat McDonald's, but they'll simply say, Dad, yeah, it costs about $9.50 for a McDonald's value meal. And I say, okay, when I was your age as a teenager, which is now 30, some years ago, that same McDonald's value meal cost me $3, right? And so my point being is that let's fast forward another 30 years from now. So now my children are my age, right? That McDonald's value meal is going to cost $27. If you don't believe it, just watch what's going to happen, over history. And maybe it costs more than that. So this kind of concept of, the inflation monster is a real impact. And I'd like for you to maybe add some color to this, but I think a lot of times people, feel like, or families feel like they're doing everything right on paper. They've got a good income, they save diligently, they're contributing to retirement, but they still feel left behind. Does that resonate?
Yeah. Oh, I think it's the biggest thing that everybody feels and is talking about, and you see it everywhere. And I hear it when I'm talking to folks that are trying to buy houses or folks that are trying to get ahead financially, and it's definitely all over the internet. But yeah, there's absolutely an understanding for young families that, like, why did that work for my parents and whoever else, and it's not working for us? And so there's this disconnect, which kind of creates, like, a little bit of distrust, like, who do I listen to? And there's so much stuff on the internet now, and it's like, you got to do Airbnb, you got to do flips, you got to do wholesales, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do drop shipping and multi-level marketing. And it's just, you're just don't know what to do. So it creates paralysis analysis. But the other layer that makes it even worse is that it did on some level work for the older generations, and the older generations communicate to the younger generations. A lot of it is kind of, hey, you need to suck it up. You just need to save. Like, I did it. It's not that hard. You clearly must not be saving enough. And the older generations aren't trying to be, they're not trying to be, they're not trying to talk down to anybody. But 90s financial advice as a whole does have a very condescending, putative, disrespectful tone to it, which is like, you need to lock it up, control your expenses, figure it out. If you aren't making enough, clearly you're doing something wrong, because we all know your income is fine. And 90s financial advice preaches a lot: budget every month and control your expenses. And you can't control your expenses. You can't control the price of gas and taxes and insurance and eggs at the grocery store and rent and your mortgage. You can't control any of that. So this idea that you're supposed to control it's like in elementary school, you play that game. Is it the limbo, right? Where you have to, like, duck under the stick, right? So 90s financial advice is like, look, if the stick's too low, you just go lower. And that assumes that you have a bunch of junk and surplus in your budget where you're spending money where you shouldn't. It doesn't 90s financial advice does not fundamentally understand or account for inflation. They don't get it. They don't understand it. And none of their philosophy or their methodology deals with it. And so it's just, and so it's very frustrating. And so again, you've got these families that are working hard, doing everything right. They're not getting ahead their way the older generations were, and everybody's barking at them and telling them they're doing it wrong.
Yep. No, that makes sense. And it's interesting that you bring that point up as well, because, I know a lot of people that followed 90s financial advice and they're still working in their late 50s, 60s, and even 70s, right? And the reason for that, again, is because of things like inflation, lifestyle creep, stagnant, real growth in terms of wages. It definitely changes the math. So, what would be, kind of your advice, I guess, for what that next step for somebody would look like if they want to get out of the 90s, financial advice? Is it, for example, starting a small business? Is it investing in hard cash flowing assets? Really, what's kind of your, advice for that person that's looking to escape this 90s financial advice wisdom?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's some education that needs to happen, but fundamentally, you have to understand why 90s financial advice doesn't work, and then what the solution is and how to implement it. And what it comes down to is cash flow. I mean, it's cash flow is just what you've had. Your income is cash flow. Your income has been decreased by inflation, so you've lost cash flow. So not only do we need to regain what you've lost, but you need to have a plan to outpace and stay ahead of inflation forever with cash flow. And 90s financial advice is a lot about appreciation, and maybe we'll get to that in a little bit. But there's basically three things that you can do to get ahead today. And I kind of look at the three main actions we have with money, right? Earning money, managing money, and investing money. And in each one of those, we want to optimize for cash flow. So how do you do that? With earning money, don't go quit your job. First of all, keep your job, but understand that the future, if you want any kind of financial independence ever, much less long before 65, which was my goal, in 5 or 10 years, you have got to optimize for cash flow and how you earn. So keep your job, but understand that the future is a hybrid worker. somebody who's got a W-2 job and then also has a source of income that they can, number one, control, right? So where you can't get laid off if your company has a bad day or you have a bad day, you can control a source of income. Number two, a source of income that you can scale. You can grow it if you decide to have more kids or move somewhere else or whatever, or if inflation kicks in. And number three, a source of income that leads to multiple sources of income. So that's what we call our three rules of income, which is something you can control, something you can scale, multiple sources of income. So that's how you earn and optimize for cash flow. Managing, people say pay off debt, as fast as you can, which is really you're taking money and putting it in a place where you can't get it back. If you're paying your mortgage down, you don't get any benefit from that until the mortgage is paid off. The capital's gone. It can't be used for anything else, which there's high opportunity cost. And you also cannot have access to it if you need it. 529s, HSAs operate a lot of the same way. They're saying, hey, plan for the future here, but there's rules and you can't get to that money if you need it. And so I strongly prefer properly structured whole life, which gives you access and growth and very preferential tax treatment. So your money grows and you can access it when you need for whatever happens. And obviously, if you have a family, you know what that looks like. And then lastly, the whole deal is retirement accounts, S&P 500, stock market. And there's a place for that, but a lot of the middle class, 100% of their liquid net worth is in the stock market. And when you look at 8 and 9 figure folks and family offices, they typically limit their allocation to 20 to 25% or less in the stock market. Stock market's not necessarily a cash flow machine, right? It's an appreciation machine. And so we really want cash flow in that. And obviously you and I are both real estate guys. Real estate's fantastic for that, but there's a lot of other vehicles that do cash flow. So you really want to optimize for cash flow in all three of those ways, and that's going to make a big difference.
Well, that's great. And I appreciate that. And I know our listening audience has heard a couple of different, times, if they're regular listeners, about this concept of whole term life insurance, but maybe in kind of your own words, can you kind of break down, why, that might be, the next move, for somebody that's listening to this podcast episode?
Yeah. And I'll tell you this, I kept seeing whole life insurance come up when I was looking at things, but every time I jump on Google, it was like scam, 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 scam. And I was like, but then, I'd meet people that swore by it or meet people that had, 27 policies. And I spent 2 years just putting I got to figure this out. The more discrepancy there was, I got to understand this. So the first thing I would say is, there are very vocal advocates. I won't name anybody, that are super against, permanent life insurance. But you got to understand, if I were to say houses are good or houses are bad, everybody understands houses and real estate. But there are good houses and bad houses. There's obviously amazing houses, great floor plan, enough bedrooms, good neighborhood, whatever. And there's bad houses, right, that are not been taken care of. And they both exist. And you can't just say houses are good or bad. It depends on the house. Whole life, the permanent life insurance world is very much like that. There are terrible whole life policies and people that structure them very poorly and very inefficiently. And there are amazing policies that are structured very well and very much that help with wealth building and wealth efficiency. So you just need to understand, if somebody says whole life is good or bad, it's, well, what kind of whole life? What are we talking about here? And there's so much to it. And most life insurance salesmen honestly don't really have that great of an understanding of it either. But I'm a big advocate and fan of infinite banking, which was created by Nelson Nash. And this is the idea here is it's first and foremost understanding what fractional reserve lending is and understanding the lost opportunity cost of how much what the finance costs you pay over life for the necessities of life, whether it be a mortgage or a car payment or college or whatever. And then understanding also that when you pay for something with cash, even though you paid with cash, you still financed it because you have the lost opportunity cost. You can't use that cash for anything else. And so infinite banking is a solution to that. And it works very, 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 very well with folks that are trying to invest specifically in real estate and other things. And again, it gives you guaranteed growth and access, which solves a lot of the problem that 90s Financial Advice has created with these accounts that lock up your money forever. So I've kind of forgotten your question at this point, but I think that's the cliff notes on infinite banking.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And you really nailed it. And I appreciate your kind of, breakdown of what that looks like. And, just from an oversimplified, state, infinite banking is really leveraging the same invested dollar, in more than one, investment. And that's kind of, what Will's been, unpacking for you here listening audience. So, Will, as we kind of look to wrap up here, what if our listeners are going to remember one thing from this conversation that we've had, whether it's, a mindset shift or, pursuing a certain amount of education, what would accelerate their path to financial independence the most?
Yeah, you've got to get your head around what if you're not where you are, if you're not where you want to be today, whether I'm hopelessly not where I want to be, or you're like, hey, some things are going well for me, but not quite everything. And for me, that was really I don't want to be financially independent at 65. I want to be financially independent as close to 40 as possible. And I turn 40 next year. And so it's not that I don't want to work, but I want to be financially independent. I want to be out of the system. If you're looking at the system, if you're looking at some of this and you're like, this just seems wonky, or if you have a desire for your family, you want to have more kids, or you want a bigger house, or you want to move closer to family, or you want to homeschool and move, to a ranch somewhere, but you can't. If there's anything that's important to you and you can't do it because you're constrained by money, you have to understand why. Why is this not working? And then understand what the solution is. And so I would say really digging into that and then understanding, look at the people that are where you want to be, and it's all about cash flow. It's just all about cash flow. And we talked about 3 ways to optimize that. And so what can you do to start moving towards that? You don't have to sit there and just take it. You're going to have to grow a little bit. You're going to have to get a little bit uncomfortable, but also understand that whatever it is that I mentioned that you're wanting for your family, that can happen. It could probably happen a lot faster if you just do a few things a little bit differently.
Yeah, it makes total sense, and appreciate that. And I kind of summarized that in 3 different points. Number one being is, first of all, you've got to recognize that there's an issue, a challenge, there's some pain there. Number 2, you have to go find out where to get educated, on making that course correction. And number 3, you just have to take action. So I appreciate your kind of advice there. So Will, what would maybe be 1 or 2 different ways that our listening audience can, connect with you to learn more about what you're up to?
Yes. So they can go to familyfirstmethod.com/ontherise, which is the name of this podcast. And we've actually got just a free gift for them that'll help move them further down. And some of the things we talked about today, they can download it there. We do a once a month challenge right now on Zoom that's 4 days. It's about an hour a day. And day 1 is the problem with 90s financial advice. Day 2 is the solution. Day 3 is implementation. And then day 4 brings it all together, and it's the vision for the future. And it's hey, here's why you would do this, and here's how it benefits your family. It's the most fun thing I do. I love it, and it's been great for everybody that's checked it out so far.
That's great. Well, I appreciate that, and we'll definitely put that link in the show notes for the episode. We'll really appreciate the tremendous value that you brought us today.
Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate being here.
Absolutely. And listening audience, thank you again for jumping into another episode of the On the Rise podcast. We look forward to having you join us on the next episode.
Thank you for hanging out with us today and for listening to the On the Rise podcast. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on this show should be considered financial advice. Before making any financial decisions, please consult with a professional. This show is copyrighted by the On the Rise podcast. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.